Hello, I'm here with Doug and Caitlin to talk about space lasers. But first, Caitlin has got Uranus. Go ahead.
Yes, so James Webb Space Telescope recently turned its camera towards Uranus, and it took some wonderful pictures of Uranus. I'll pull up the article right now. Um, so this is on space.com. This is by Keith Cooper, who wrote the original article. And you can see one of the images here. So you can see that Uranus is sort of on its side. It sort of looks like a hole in space, if you will. And the reason why it looks like that is because Uranus has rings around it, many rings, in fact, and these brilliant rings, which are very hard to see. It also has 27 moons. I don't know if you can see all 27 in this image. Some of them are embedded in the rings, but several, like Titania, you can definitely see in this image. And Uranus is just such a wonderful place because it's the only planet in the solar system that rotates on its side. So instead of rotating like we do, where once a day is, sort of going around the equator, um, it sort of points its pole towards the sun at
So,
almost, yeah,
so it's rotating towards what would be our North Pole.
kind of. So yeah, so it sort of rolls. So it's sort of instead of so if you think of Earth as spinning like a top,
Yeah.
Uranus sort of rolls around like a ball
Yeah.
as it goes around the sun.
So that means the sun will traverse like a spiral in the sky, sitting right at the peak and then doing sort of wobbles bigger and bigger. And
Yep.
you'll
So
have like,
it's not perfectly 90 degrees. So if you're in the
yeah,
right spot on Uranus, you can
yeah.
see the sun sort of dip down below the horizon and up again, then dip down below the horizon
Mhm.
just at the right spot. Now, what's interesting is that Uranus is the seventh planet in the solar system, not the eighth. So beyond Uranus is Neptune, but Uranus is also the coldest planet in the solar system,
Mhm.
despite not being the furthest. And scientists don't know why that is.
Well, now I've read that Jupiter gets twice as much heat from internal processes as from the sun. So I
Right.
would think that the sun is not really the main source of heat for these planets anyway.
It's not, but for whatever reason, Uranus does not produce much internal heat as well. So it's one of the coldest places and one of the most toxic. I believe much of the clouds are hydrogen sulfide.
Hmm.
And the bluish hue, and I'll go back to the image. So this is the full sort of frame image of Uranus, but if you see this hue here, which is not true color hue, I mean, remember, James Webb is looking at infrared,
Right.
but if you look at Uranus through a regular telescope, and I wish, oh, I just got some images of Uranus the other night, and I should have probably got them up for the podcast, but I forgot. But if you look through it, it looks like this sort of bluish hue, light bluish hue, and that's from the methane in the atmosphere. And one of the other cool things about Uranus is that as you descend into the atmosphere, the pressure increases so much that it turns some of the carbon that's in the methane into small diamonds. So it actually rains diamonds on Uranus.
Now I've heard that the rings of Saturn don't really last very long. And I want to guess the same thing would be true of these rings. They
They last a good while. They last hundreds of thousands of years at least.
Mhm.
But um, all rings are inherently unstable. And
So they must be being replenished by satellites breaking up or something, I guess.
yeah. So what happens is that satellites go into the Roche limit of
Right.
the planet, which is the area where the tidal forces essentially like break it apart
Yeah.
and break apart the planet. They turn it into rings, but unfortunately, it is a little unstable. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. All right. And Doug has the Nikola founder.
Yeah. So Nikola founder, his name is Trevor Milton. And for those of you who don't know, Nikola Trucks was created by an individual called Trevor Milton. And he's just been convicted, similar to Elizabeth Holmes, of fraud. and is spending 4 years in prison. He was just sentenced this week. And unlike Elizabeth Holmes, he walked away with $4 billion with his scam. And let me give you a little background about the whole story of Nikola Trucks, because I really think he had a pretty clever business model, and that he wanted, instead of going with like Tesla trucks going electric, his idea was to go with hydrogen power. And we have no hydrogen power infrastructure, if you will.
Right.
But the brilliant part of his sales pitch was that California has excess solar electricity. We take water, we break that apart into hydrogen and oxygen, and there's your hydrogen power. And instead of having to put hydrogen fueling stations all throughout the state, his idea was to put one in Los Angeles, one in San Francisco, one in Las Vegas, and just have the trucking route between the three of those. And that way, they only needed to go to one spot. They're going there anyway. These are big semi trucks. So they would go from Los Angeles, or the port in Los Angeles, to San Francisco Bay Area, refuel, and come back. The hydrogen would come from, again, the splitting of water from excess electricity, specifically solar, that our power companies in California have to get rid of, that they're actually paying companies to take. And he also did a $2 billion partnership with General Motors. And General Motors did not do any due diligence on this and quickly learned that it was a fraud. And there was a company about 3 years ago, I think, called the Hindenburg Group, who listed 50 frauds that Trevor was was trying to or was sharing with shareholders, investors. And the most famous one is probably the truck that he towed up in, I think it was Utah, and they tilted the camera just right, that the truck was rolling down a hill under gravity, under being pulled by gravity, instead of being powered by hydrogen. Right. And he also had a truck show where he was showing off his Nikola truck, and people took high-res photos and realized this was just off the shelf products that he spray painted and covered with masking tape, and presented as his own super secret sauce, if you will. So again, Trevor Milton was arrested around the same time that Elizabeth Holmes was, but he walked away with originally $2 billion, and I'm not sure how he got up to $4 billion right now. He had a very good legal team, but it looks like he lost. A jury convicted him. And he's also, another claim to fame is that he bought the most expensive home in Utah at $44 million a few years back. So this is kind of the end of the story for Trevor. And it's been a long, interesting story if you follow court cases like that and fraud. Yeah. But 4 years for him, 9 years for Elizabeth Holmes, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. But at least he'll have $4 billion when he gets out, maybe 6 if he invested it well.
Like in Dogecoin.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, there's an article on ZDNet that I found that caught my attention. Yeah. Apple has another security feature worth turning on. There was this security feature that came out about a year ago intended to stop the Predator malware for high value targets. But this one here is stolen device protection. And the idea is they think somebody will watch you enter your PIN, learn your PIN, and then steal your phone and log in with your PIN and find all your stuff. And apparently that's enough of a threat that they have a specific defense against it. So you turn on this thing called stolen device protection, and it will make it repeat your biometric authentication in addition to your PIN to do risky activities like changing your password and such, or viewing your passwords. So it sounds pretty good. It's not on by default. It might be a good thing to turn on if you're worried about that threat model, which I guess you would be if you're around other people that see you entering your PIN, which I guess almost everybody is, considering how many times Caitlin has hacked me, stole my PIN several times, then started just stealing my phone and sticking it in front of my face to make it unlock. And in general, this would be pretty good to help limit the amount of times I get hacked by Caitlin. Anyway.
So this brings up kind of an interesting story. There was not too long ago a newlywed couple that was flying to Hawaii, and the new husband fell asleep. The new wife holds up the phone, unlocks it while the husband's sleeping,
Yeah.
notices pictures of a different woman on the plane, got into a big fight, and as I recall, the airplane had to make an emergency landing because of the violence that was occurring on board.
Yeah, I think I heard.
Needless to say, I think they got a quick divorce. But would this prevent?
The solution would be to lock your phone better.
So would this prevent against that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it stops you seeing the pictures. It stops you doing certain things.
So
yeah,
it's not a full unlock of the phone.
Right. Certain high value activities like changing your passwords or viewing passwords are blocked until you repeat biometric authentication, which she had. So if you turn on just biometric authentication without a PIN, then I think you don't have much safety.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, let's go back to Caitlin with the video of a cat.
Yes. So obviously NASA is, putting our tax money to good use and sending cat pictures throughout the solar system, which is fantastic. I love this. So let's go over to over to the browser. So this is CNN, and this is by Ashley Strickland. And here's an image of the video right here, and we can play a little bit of the video. Here we go. It's just a cat, of course, chasing a laser pointer, and the cat. Oh God, what's the cat's name? It's I'll remember in a second. But yeah, the cat's just chasing a laser pointer. Now this is interesting because the video was sent using laser light essentially, so it's a very appropriate video. Cats in space chasing laser pointers. So this what's the cat's name? Playful Orange Tabby. There's a name of the cat. I totally forget. Do you remember, Sam?
I don't remember.
Name. No, it doesn't. Named Taters. That's right. Taters. Taters the cat. So Taters the cat. And you can see here, you can also see the NASA console in the background. I'm sure there's some interesting logs that we can go through from this screenshot. I don't know why NASA allowed this sort of thing to be displayed on the news sites, but whatever. That's just me being cybersecurity at NASA for a long time. Anyway, so yeah, they have, if you look in the image, you can see where the spacecraft is going, where Earth is. And essentially the spacecraft that they sent the image to is going to Psyche. So right now it is around 30 million kilometers away. So Psyche is an asteroid in the asteroid belt. And so it's on its way there. It's way past the moon. If I had to guess, I'd say it's at least 10 to 12 times as far away from the moon. So this is deep space, and they were testing infrared laser communication. And the exact speeds are not known. They say that it is about as fast as most broadband connections, and it downloaded 1.2 terabits of information over the course of an evening. So we can sort of guesstimate here how fast this link is. A little calculator. So we have a terabit is a trillion bits. Let's see, that's no.
1,000 gigs.
Yeah. So yeah, 1,000. So that's a kilobyte. That's a megabyte. Okay, so kilo, mega, giga.
No, you got hundreds instead of thousands there.
No, we're times 10. Oh, wait, yeah, times 1,000.
1,000 times 1,000 times
Yeah,
1,000.
Yeah, but I mean, there's 1,000 gigs over a night, which is what, like 6 hours. So it's going to
Yeah,
be like
oh yeah. So it'd be
200
about
gigs an hour.
8 gigs over an evening.
Yeah.
No, wait, no,
Oh,
terabit.
it's like 20 gigs an hour.
Yeah, like 20 gigs. Yeah, something. Yeah, several gigabytes per. Yeah, I can't do math. It's too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so terabit we'll just divide by 8. So that's about 100 and
So I'm getting like 10 megs in my
yeah,
estimation, about 10 megabits per second.
yeah. So it's not bad, but keep in mind the distance too.
Yeah,
And they
before we had terrible bandwidth to deep space, right? Like sort of dial-up bandwidth.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, a lot of the deep space network was developed in like the 90s or even earlier, and the technology really hasn't improved that much because we're dealing with very long distances, and you don't want the data getting garbled or messed up on the way.
So basically, if you ride a spaceship out to deep space, you'd have terrible internet. It'd be a miserable experience.
Well, yeah, you have terrible internet and you have to deal with, of course, lag, which is a big thing because on Earth, yeah, you might get a few milliseconds of lag. And if anyone who's ever dealt with lag issues before will know that milliseconds is annoying. Now, imagine if light takes minutes or hours to reach its destination. Can you imagine trying to do a Zoom call?
You know, all those people volunteering to move to Mars for Elon Musk, I think if they find out that you're going to get 10 kilobits per second internet, they would all just cancel.
Oh, I mean, it wouldn't. How would you couldn't even really do the internet from Mars? Everything would just time out because Mars is at least 20 light minutes away. At
Well,
least.
that's it. I'm not going.
Yeah. So, but you have to consider round trip time as well. So you have to get the signal to the servers on Earth and then back to Mars. So that's going to be at least 40 minutes, but probably longer because usually Mars is not a direct opposition to the Earth. And so, you really could not have like a real-time internet thing where you just like download a page and stuff. You would basically have to do something like you scrape Wikipedia and then you send all of Wikipedia over to Mars in order for something like that to work.
We need caching servers.
Yes,
That's the first thing we need to put on Mars.
yes.
Cache.
Yep.
Yes, we need caching servers. The other thing too, of course, is that that's actually how the Deep Space Network works, is that you have like satellites, for example, orbiting Mars. And if you have a rover on Mars, as one does, it will send data to those orbiting satellites. Now, those orbiting satellites will sort of cache the data. And then when an opportunity arises, because it's not always available, but when an Earth is in view, it will then send the data. But let's say Earth isn't directly in view, or maybe some other satellite is in view. It'll send it to that satellite, where that satellite will then cache the data.
Yeah.
And then when an opportunity arises, it'll then send it to something closer to Earth. And when an opportunity arises, that will start sending data down to a ground station. Now, sometimes you can't get the full packet, so it'll do like partial pieces of packets, and caching is very complicated, but that's how deep space networking or delay tolerant networking works in the Deep Space Network.
Yeah, a lot like email.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right.
it's very slow. It's not super fast. But
So-
if all you're doing is sending cat images, I mean, it's
So Wi-Fi repeaters with caching.
pretty much, yes.
Yeah, and a protocol designed for that, so there's no
Yeah. And Caitlin, if I recall correctly, when the Curiosity and what was the other the two robots?
Spirit and Curiosity.
Yeah, Spirit and Curiosity. As I recall, when those landed, it took 45 minutes to issue a command and get confirmation of the command as they started moving the robots around. So it's not exactly that quick, I guess I should say. Slow frame rate.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
We need to find faster light, clearly.
Yeah, clearly.
now what's really interesting is we don't know if light is only slow in one direction or if it's slow in both directions. We still haven't figured that out.
What?
No, we still haven't, because you can only measure the return path of light. And so if you look at the data going between Earth and Mars, one would reasonably assume that the speed of light is constant in all directions, but it hasn't been proven, or at least experimentally shown that to be the case.
I think the Michelson-Morley experiment proved it.
Well,
150
no,
years ago.
Michelson-Morley disproved the luminiferous ether.
And
Okay,
the whole point was to see that light moved the same in both directions, which it did.
no, but
Me-
you cannot view the you cannot measure the speed of light in one way. It's always the reach. You always have to bounce it back.
Hmm.
So we do not know if light actually. Now it's reasonable to assume that it does, but it hasn't been experimentally confirmed that light moves the same speed in all directions.
I'm very skeptical. But anyway, let's
But you're right, Sam. That was what the Michelson-Morley
yeah,
experiment
they
was
did
all
two
about.
things at right angles, but she's right. They measured the round trip time at right angles, but I have I'm pretty sure you could prove that it's the same time in both directions, although you're right, that isn't directly measured. There's anyway, let's go on to you. You have another story from Marketplace.
Yeah, so this is actually from, let me just look here for a second. From the Wall Street Journal, this is an article
Oh,
that Meta / Facebook, Instagram, their algorithm is somehow favoring online predators.
oh yeah.
And this is probably something you've heard about, but this is now being kind of publicly explained to the lay people out there. Nothing new, I don't think, but it's interesting that they haven't caught this yet and corrected
I
it.
saw an expose a few months ago where they have names of Facebook channels that make it obvious that they're sexual predators and they do nothing about it.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. Just
Right.
and apparently Twitter just announced that all sorts of hate speech are now just complicitly permitted. So
Yeah, that's the topic for another discussion, I think. But
yeah,
yeah,
just this I think the real product of social networking is content moderation. That's the only thing that makes it palatable enough to stay on the social network, and yet these these big ones are not doing their job.
yeah, I would agree. But
Yeah.
then we had that whole issue with Fauci and the government talking to Facebook, Twitter about
Right.
what should be shared when
Right.
it comes to COVID.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, when the government
Yeah,
would like to step in when you have disinformation, but that arguably violates the First Amendment and might be opening a can of worms you don't want to open. So right
exactly.
now, the Biden administration is blocked against telling them anything, which is perhaps an overreaction, but that's where we are.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now. Agree.
All right. Anyway, there's a Bitcoin article I thought was interesting because Bitcoin is arguably a complete failure right from the beginning, in that the fundamental point of Bitcoin was that it would be distributed among many organizations in many nations, so no one nation could control it. And yet, because they planned it, so the calculation only involves calculating SHA-256 of SHA-256, it turns out the only thing to limit your efficiency as a Bitcoin miner is the speed of the processor. And that meant that only certain places could ever win, which would be places right next to a power plant where, due to corruption, or you can get free power or cheap power. So it was, for a long time, it was totally concentrated in the nation of China. And China could have performed a 51% attack if they wanted to. But the government of China, instead of like pressuring all the Bitcoin miners in China to join a conspiracy and cheat people, instead just said, "What is this Bitcoin garbage?" They threw them out of the country. But what happened after that is there's a new consolidation. They have a nice chart of the mining percentage here. And it turns out that 27% is done by Foundry USA and 27% is done by Antpool. So if those two major pools got together, they would have more than 50% of all the mining power, which violates the whole fundamental security policy of Bitcoin, which, by the way, as before, Bitcoin was supposed to be immune against any government action or conspiracy, and it never achieved that. In practice, nobody seems to have formed that conspiracy to corrupt the blockchain, but they could. And that's why, later protocols are designed differently to try to make it harder for one person to dominate that much of the mining. But anyway, Nothing bad has actually happened yet, but the fundamental security principle has been violated yet again.
So
Anyway,
what do you think the future is of Bitcoin?
I think it'll carry on just fine. It's survived time. It has its flaws like anything else, but I think it'll remain pretty much like gold, a store of value on into the future.
Yeah.
People find some value in it, and it does withstand the attacks and security flaws it has pretty well. So I think Bitcoin and Ethereum will be with us for a long time.
Okay.
But I don't think they're going to become a significant part of the economy. I think it'll remain down in like 1% of the economy kind of thing.
It's still going to be fringe.
Sure, because there really is no need for a normal person to use it. It's only going
Right.
to be used by people that want to do tax evasion and money laundering, or perhaps a few other strange cases like El Salvador, where their local currency is so terrible they thought it'd be better to be based on Bitcoin, and speculators and stuff. But normal people will just use dollars and Visa and MasterCard.
Yeah. So is Tesla, they originally, or at one time were accepting Bitcoins for payment, right?
They were, and Dogecoin. And
Oh, and Dogecoin.
Elon Musk found that he could pump the price of Dogecoin up and down with tweets. And there were some lawsuits supposedly for like price manipulation. I don't think they went anywhere, but he's a whale. And that's the problem with all these. The whales, the people who own a lot of it, just drag the market around, manipulate it like
Right.
crazy. Of course, you
Yeah.
could say the same thing about the stock market, but anyway, you're sort of a flea on the back of a whale being jerked around by a force beyond your control if you
Right.
invest in these things.
Right.
Anyway, let's go back to Caitlin with Project Kuiper. I've heard some things about that.
Right. Before we do that, though, I'll throw your attention here to Space Australia, since there was some contention earlier. And this is the paragraph that I want to quote from. So this is a direct quote. Any variation on this experiment, meaning testing the speed of light, will have the same compilation. We cannot measure the speed of light in one direction because relativity prevents us from maintaining synchronized clocks. The result is that the speed of light is really the average speed over a round trip journey, and we cannot be certain that the speed is the same in both directions.
Bah humbug.
I know it doesn't seem right. but
I'm pretty skeptical. But you are
yeah,
correct that a simple, ordinary experiment won't find it. I bet you could design an experiment to find it, but maybe I'm wrong.
people have tried. Smarter people than me, I will admit. I'm not.
So, so couldn't you do the experiment I believe they did in the 60s where you have two cesium clocks?
Well, yeah, but you don't know they're synchronized.
Right.
And how could you know? This point is more.
Well, how did they do the experiment where they carried one on a plane, flew around the world for 24 hours?
Well, they carried it somewhere and then brought it back and compared it.
Right.
That's the problem. The only thing you can ever know about is the round trip. If you take it somewhere else and don't bring it back, you can't compare the time anymore.
But if you have two of them and you send a beam from one cesium clock to the other,
Yeah.
you've got an element of time.
Yes.
And if you send it back, you've got the element of time. And you
Right.
can see if those two agree with each other. And if the cesium clocks are stationary, then you don't have any time dilation because of movement.
Well, you're assuming the Lorentz equation to try to prove the Lorentz equation. That's the problem. You don't know that the clocks remain synchronized when you separated them.
Ah, okay.
That's what you're trying
Got
to
it.
test. That's why she's right. There is a subtlety here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. They may be desynchronized in such a way that it looks like they're synchronized, but what's really going on is that light is just traveling in one direction much slower than the other. You see.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm not the physicist.
Me
Yeah.
neither.
Yeah.
I did take physics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Yeah. So I'm going to get on my high horse since we're on a podcast, and I will say, in school, science was always taught as we're sort of in the final stages. It's not until much after school when I started, doing a lot more STEM stuff that I realized there's a lot of stuff we still don't really know. Very fundamental things. And that was kind of off-putting to me, going through schools. I thought, oh, this is solved stuff. There's nothing left to do except, minutia, but there's still a lot of fundamental questions left to be answered. So,
Oh, I think there are. And of course, there's the important questions to human life.
Yeah.
That are not directly related to science and technology, which are really more important.
Mhm.
And we haven't made a whole lot of progress on that at all, like sociology, politics, and psychology.
Yeah. What is the best way to run a society? Is it truly democracy? How do we know
That's
this?
right.
They're probably very happy. Maybe people are happier under dictatorship. People seem to gravitate towards it for some reason.
People
Why
are
is
quite
that?
happy and pay high morale in China
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
80% support for Putin in Russia. So it's not.
Well, here's the thing with a dictator, with a dictatorship. And I heard this in the Middle East, and someone said, you want us to have democracy here. With a dictator, if we want a new subway, we want a new freeway, the dictator says it shall be, and it is done. You'll argue for 20, 50 years. Look at high-speed rail in California. How long have we been debating over that?
Yeah.
If you have a dictator, it would have been done and in service and losing money instead
Yeah,
of us debating for 20 years and having it lose money.
that's what George Bush Jr. said. He said a dictatorship would be much more efficient. And then, like the next day, sort of like Donald Trump, he said, "Gee, why is everybody mad at me?"
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. Dictators can be efficient. The problem is they do tend to go corrupt. So maybe the best thing would be having some sort of AI dictator.
Having some
Well,
sort
does that mean that we don't have corrupt politicians either?
I mean,
Yeah,
that's the
get rid of.
problem. The dictator makes decisions, but the problem is when he decides against you, you're just screwed. And
Right.
there's something he doesn't like some ethnic group he disapproves of, and they're just screwed.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe a democratically controlled authoritarian figure where you have the citizenship
Yeah.
doing the programming for like an AI that makes all the decisions, something like that. Who
There you
knows?
go. It'll
Yeah,
clearly be a DAO on the blockchain will be the
yeah,
perfect form of government.
exactly. So yeah, yeah. I mean, there are very fundamental questions we really don't have concrete answers to. We have philosophical answers, but there's a reason why in grade school we always teach kids, freedom's so important, democracy is so important, because we really don't have the facts to back that up. So we have to
That's
just
right.
sort of
So we
drill it in. Yeah,
we deliver them propaganda to support our system, just like everybody else. We're the greatest.
exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think America's great. Don't.
Yeah. Well,
Shut up.
what's the greatest is Project Kuiper, of course.
Yes, Project Kuiper. Thank you for getting me back on
Yes.
topic. So, Project Kuiper had recently sent up 2 satellites. It's been a huge success. And just like the cat video that was sent via laser, the Kuiper satellites successfully tested their laser communications as well. And what's really cool about this is that the satellites can then have these super high speed interfaces with each other, so that the satellites can, as Doug said, cache the data, and then get the data back down immediately. Because one of the big problems with satellites is that they're a bit far away. So you do get a bit of latency. Plus, the satellites need to sometimes, go to like specific ground stations and, figure out how to get the data from the ground station to that specific satellite to the user. But having these high-speed optical links between satellites will improve its efficiency manyfold. And not only that, it also integrates well with like AWS services. So if you're developing a product like an aircraft that needs internet connectivity, because currently what's happening is that if you go on like a flight, you'll notice that the internet is slow and it costs a ton of money. The reason why that is because they are using geostationary satellites, which are super far away, super laggy, and just sort of slow and not that efficient. But if you're building a product like an aircraft, and you want the aircraft fleet to like communicate with each other in real time, you can do that with Kuiper. So I mean, that's amazing. You can't do that with traditional systems. There's too much lag and stuff like that. But with something like Kuiper, which all the satellites can have direct communication with each other with these high-speed internet or high-speed laser links. You can have one airplane over here communicating with like another airplane over here on the other side of the world, just using these high-speed optical links, and they can sort of synchronize with each other and do stuff. I mean, the opportunities are endless, and I'm so glad that Kuiper is turning out so well, and it's a great way to sort of kick Starlink in the booty because it's going to be faster and better.
So Starlink doesn't have this satellite to satellite laser communication?
Nope.
Oh, that
How,
does
how
change
do the how do the satellites, pardon me, with Starlink communicate with each other, or do they?
I'm sure they do. It's probably all just RF stuff.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
So
you know,
lower speed.
yeah, much slower speed. I mean, just Kuiper's just coming out later, and that's just using more modern technology. It's using higher frequencies on the ground side, so things will be faster. And it is also having these like cool optical links that between the satellites. And of course, AWS is also very much partnered with the US government with like GovCloud. And wait, did I mention that the person who wrote this article? I don't think I did. So I'll go back and do that. So this is on Popular Science, and this is by Mac Degurin. I want to give Mac credit here. Anyway, so AWS and Amazon is works closely with the US government with like GovCloud and stuff, and Kuiper will integrate with that as well. So it's not just like consumers who are going to be making good use of this. It's also the government, which is going to drive down the prices for consumers as well. So I
So,
think yeah.
so what? How is it we can communicate faster with a laser than we can with RF? Aren't they both moving theoretically in a vacuum at the speed of light?
They are. So when we're communicating with a like a radio wave, we're generally not, it's not the wave itself that's like, we're not like blinking it on and off. The data is usually encoded either in the frequency or in, usually more often, the phase.
So,
Yeah.
so either amplitude modulation or frequency modulation.
Actually, it's usually phase modulation.
Okay, or phase mod. Yeah.
Yeah. So for digital communications, it's a combination of phase and amplitude. So this is where the term QAM comes from, quadrature amplitude modulation, where
Okay.
where you look at the phase and you look at the amplitude. So and you plot it out and you're able to encode data. Now, at higher frequencies, the phase changes can happen much quicker, which means that you can get faster data throughput, and you can also deal with a larger bandwidth as well, because that's another thing you have to think about with data transfer is the bandwidth available to you. So let's say I wanted to use a megabyte, or not, a megahertz of bandwidth. At lower frequencies, for example, like AM radio, that would take up the entire band, right? You just can't do that.
Right.
But if you are using something like Wi-Fi or even more specifically, something like, the Ka band, a megahertz is nothing when you're talking about something like, 30 gigahertz in the spectrum. So you have more bandwidth, and the phases are closer together. So you can,
Okay.
Yeah, the carrier frequency is much higher.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Now, why don't you go ahead, Doug? You had another story from Marketplace, I thought.
Yeah. So this is Marketplace and Consumer Reports, Matt Schwartz. And this is all about trying to protect your data privacy. And consumers are complaining of consent fatigue. And as we all know, when we visit a website, we have to accept cookies or deny cookies, and it's just overwhelming people. And I don't know if there's a solution. Nobody really cares about the cookies anymore, I don't think, because if you want to visit the website, you got to do it one way or the other. Otherwise, you have a banner or something that's blocking your view. And if you do accept, then there's tracking that can begin by those cookies. So, and anyway, there's a risk with that, is where this is going.
Yep. I've seen people blame GDPR for these stupid cookie warnings you see all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's a similar rule in California where they have to warn you if a potentially cancer-causing substance is present. So you just see it everywhere on gas stations, movie theaters, everywhere.
Yeah.
Kind of like the boy who cried wolf. It ceases to have any meaning.
Yeah. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I've even seen
So,
it like on a pack of cigarettes and stuff. Like it's just who
As if that was
knows?
bad for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, the one I thought was interesting is this was a few years ago. I went into local hardware store and they had little refrigerators of Coca-Cola. And on the refrigerator, it has a cancer warning that contents, meaning in the refrigerator, Coca-Cola may cause cancer.
Well, I wasn't aware Coca-Cola would, but I imagine the refrigerant in the pipes or something might.
Well, no, but this way they're covered just in case
Oh, well.
Coca-Cola does cause cancer.
Oh, well.
They've informed you before you purchase the product.
Uh, well, anyway, the last one I got here is from Cyberscoop. So these ransomware groups over the last month or two would actually report their ransomware attack to the government and say, these people failed to report in time, go punish them. Well, it turns out one of the many flaws about that is that law hadn't taken effect yet, but now it has. It just went into effect. This is the rule that requires publicly traded companies to report a breach within 4 days. And the idea here is that that breach might affect your stock price. And so your investors should know. And some people are mad because there's already another rule. That's the Security Exchange Commission that requires you to notify people within 4 days when you get hacked. But there's already another rule that forces critical infrastructure companies to tell a government agency tell CISA within 3 days. But anyway, they apply to slightly different businesses, and people say they're complementary instead of contradictory. So we'll see what comes of this. Those both seem like really short amounts of time to me. It seems to me like you very well might not really know you've got a breach. And I think one consequence of this is people will now be afraid to have any emails about a possible breach, because then you'd be dragged into court later saying, this email shows that you knew about it more than 4 days before. So anyway, we'll see what comes of all this. But it's taking effect now. So probably within the next few months, we're going to see some enforcement actions, punishing people for failing to tell the government within 4 days that they had been hacked.
Now, is this US only?
Yes, I think they're both US only.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
US Security Exchange Commission, and the other one is
Yeah.
CISA. So yeah, this is just the US. I think Europe has their own reporting requirements.
I don't know. I'm not familiar, but
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Europe usually has these things sooner. Anyway, it'll affect American companies, and I'm sure there'll be some drama coming out of that. Anyway, I think that's it for this one, and we'll have another one on Friday.
Sounds good.
All right.